Struggling single mom buys formula with quarters. The CEO behind her whispers, "Put it on my card." The corner store was quiet, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, as if even they were tired of shining. Shelves stood tall and full, but Mary's basket was almost empty. She clutched it with trembling hands, her face pale from exhaustion, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. At her side, a little girl tugged gently at her sleeve, whispering for biscuits, for milk, for something sweet, something that felt like childhood. Mary's lips pressed into a thin line. She counted the coins in her palm, once, twice, then again, praying they might somehow multiply. But the truth was merciless. There wasn't enough for both food and rent. Survival had taught her to choose silence over indulgence, necessity over dreams. With a heavy breath, she returned the biscuits to the shelf, her daughter's eyes following every movement with quiet disappointment. From behind the counter, Joseph watched. His broad shoulders shifted uneasily, his eyes softening at the sight before him. He had seen hunger before, seen desperation, but there was something different here, a dignity in the way Mary carried her struggle, as though she refused to let poverty strip her of pride. The little girl coughed lightly, breaking the silence, and Joseph's hands clenched against the counter. He wanted to help, but his pride warred with compassion. To speak might shame her. To stay silent felt like betrayal. And so he stood, caught in the storm of his own hesitation, as Mary lowered her gaze and approached the counter with her meager basket, a basket that said more about her life than any words could. In that moment, the world outside carried on, cars passing, rain tapping against the glass. But inside that small store, time seemed to still. A tired mother, a hungry child, and a stranger with a choice, whether to watch or to act. The door of the corner store creaked open, and Mary stepped out into the night. The rain had grown heavier, falling in sheets that blurred the streetlights into smudges of gold. She pulled her worn coat tighter around her shoulders, tucking the small paper bag of groceries close to her chest. Beside her, her daughter stumbled to keep up, her tiny shoes splashing into puddles that soaked her socks. Mary didn't complain. She never did. She only lowered her head against the downpour and kept walking, each step echoing the quiet rhythm of endurance. But inside, her heart cracked with every glance at her daughter's trembling hands, her damp hair sticking to her cheeks. Childhood was meant to be warm and bright, not this endless march through cold rain and empty nights. Behind them, Joseph stood at the store's doorway, the sound of the bell still fading. He had watched her leave, her figure shrinking against the storm. For a moment, he considered letting her go. After all, it wasn't his place. She hadn't asked for help. She had carried herself with the kind of strength that made silence seem like respect. And yet, something in him refused to let the night close on that image, a woman shielding her child with nothing but tired arms and borrowed strength. He grabbed his umbrella, his coat, and stepped into the rain. The storm swallowed him instantly. Cold drops beat against his face, soaking his clothes as he quickened his pace, his eyes fixed on the two figures ahead. Their steps were slower now, the little girl shivering against her mother's side. "Wait!" Joseph called, his voice carrying over the rainfall. Mary turned, startled. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Confusion flashed across her face. Why would a stranger follow her into the storm? Her instinct was to keep walking, to protect the little dignity she had left. But something in his expression, sincere, steady, unthreatening, made her pause. The rain poured harder, drumming on the pavement around them.
And there they stood, 3 souls in the downpour, caught between fear, pride, and the possibility of an unexpected kindness.
The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked coats. Mary sat stiffly in the plastic chair beside her daughter's bed, her damp clothes clinging to her skin, her hair curling against her cheeks. The little girl lay under thin white sheets, her breathing shallow but steady, a small IV taped to her fragile arm. Machines beeped softly, marking time in a language that only grief and fear seemed to understand. Mary's hands never stopped moving, adjusting the blanket, smoothing her daughter's hair, gripping her own knees to keep from shaking. Exhaustion tugged at her eyes, but she refused to close them. If she slept, she feared the world might take everything from her in silence. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Joseph stepped inside, his coat still wet from the storm, his hair plastered against his forehead. He carried no umbrella this time, no rehearsed words, just the quiet weight of a man who had made a choice. "You shouldn't be here," Mary whispered, her voice sharp from habit, not anger. Life had taught her to keep strangers at arm's length, to survive without expecting help. "I know," Joseph said softly, his eyes fixed on the little girl. "But I couldn't leave knowing you were alone in this." Mary looked away, ashamed of her own trembling lip. Alone. The word cut too close. She wanted to argue, to push him out of this fragile space, but her defenses cracked when her daughter stirred, murmuring in her sleep, "Mama." Joseph moved closer, his presence steady, not pressing. "Let me help, not as charity, not because I pity you, because I can, and because I want to." The fluorescent light hummed above them, the storm still raging beyond the window. Mary's throat tightened. No one had spoken to her like that in years, not with pity, but with respect. Her voice faltered as she whispered, "I don't need saving." Joseph nodded. "Then don't think of it as saving. Think of it as someone standing beside you, so you don't have to carry all of this alone." Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Mary lowered her gaze to her daughter, brushing her hair back with a trembling hand. Something inside her shifted, a flicker of trust, small but undeniable. And in that dim hospital room, without ceremony or grand promises, Joseph made a vow, not to rescue her, but to stay, to walk beside her through the storm until she could stand on her own again. The rain had passed by morning, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under pale sunlight. The hospital room felt less heavy now, though Mary's eyes still carried shadows of the night before. Her daughter slept peacefully, her cheeks no longer fevered, and for the first time in days, Mary allowed herself to exhale. When Joseph appeared at the doorway again, she almost protested, but the quiet smile he carried disarmed her. In his hands were 2 paper cups, steam curling upward in lazy spirals. "Peace offering," he said, extending one toward her. "It's just coffee, nothing more." Mary hesitated, pride battling gratitude. Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the cup, the warmth seeping into her palms. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been until that moment. Taking a cautious sip, she closed her eyes briefly, the bitter comfort settling like an anchor in her chest. Later, they found themselves at a small cafe across the street. The place smelled of fresh bread and roasted beans, its windows fogged with morning condensation. Mary sat across from Joseph at a corner table, her posture guarded, but softer than before. The little girl, wrapped in a borrowed scarf, sat between them, dunking a piece of bread into her hot chocolate with wide-eyed concentration. For the first time, laughter touched Mary's lips. It surprised her, light, quick, almost forgotten. She covered her mouth as though it didn't belong to her anymore.
Joseph noticed but said nothing, only smiling into his cup as if storing the sound away. They spoke in fragments at first, about weather, about the child, about anything that kept the silence from stretching too thin. But slowly the words deepened. Mary confessed she once worked in an office before everything fell apart. Joseph admitted he had lost someone too, though he didn't press details. There, in that cafe of clinking cups and quiet warmth, something began to take shape. Not love, not yet, but a fragile thread of connection spun from shared humanity and small kindnesses. When Mary finally rose to leave, her basket heavier this time with bread Joseph had quietly paid for, the morning sun caught her face through the window, and though her steps remained cautious, there was a new steadiness in them, a hint of a woman remembering she could still begin again.
The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, their golden light scattering across polished marble floors. Music swelled from a live orchestra, elegant and commanding, as men in tailored suits and women in silken gowns drifted between gilded tables. It was a world Mary hadn't stepped into for years, a world she had once glimpsed from afar but never belonged to. Tonight, she entered not as a guest of wealth, but as a woman finding her footing again. Joseph had invited her, assuring her that she deserved to be seen, to stand tall in a room that once would have ignored her existence. Her dress was simple, borrowed, yet she carried herself with quiet grace, her daughter's hand clutched in hers as they walked among glitter and whispers. For a moment, Mary almost believed in this new beginning, until her gaze collided with a ghost from the past. James. He stood near the bar, a glass of champagne in hand, his laughter sharp and rehearsed. His eyes landed on her, widening with recognition, then narrowing with something darker. The room seemed to tilt. Memories of betrayal, of forged papers and vanished trust rushed back in cruel waves. Mary's breath caught, but she did not falter. Not this time. She straightened her shoulders, steadying her daughter against her side, her heartbeat pounding like a drum beneath the music. Joseph approached, his smile dripping with false charm. "Mary," he drawled, his voice smooth but edged with venom, "I didn't expect to see you here, especially not in this company." His gaze flicked toward Joseph, calculating, testing. Joseph's jaw tightened, his calm presence suddenly sharp as steel. He moved subtly closer to Mary, his silent stance a shield. "Careful," he said evenly, his voice low but carrying weight. The confrontation drew whispers around them, eyes turning, curiosity stirring like ripples in still water. Mary felt the old shame claw at her, threatening to drag her back into silence. But Joseph's steady hand at her back reminded her she was not alone anymore. With a breath that trembled but did not break, Mary lifted her chin. "I am not the woman you left behind," she said, her voice clear enough to pierce the music. "And I won't let you steal from me again." James's smile faltered, just for a moment. The room seemed to shift, power tilting away from him toward the woman who had once walked away broken, but now stood unshaken in the light of chandeliers. And beneath the glamour, beneath the glittering lies, the truth began to stir. The air in the ballroom grew heavy, charged like a storm about to break. The orchestra faltered as whispers rippled through the crowd, curious eyes darting toward the standoff at the center of the room. Mary stood tall, her daughter at her side, Joseph steady behind her. Across from them, James's mask of charm cracked, arrogance flickering into unease. "You don't belong here, Mary," James sneered, though his voice had lost its polish. "This world isn't for people like you. You should know your place." Mary's heart hammered, but for the first time in years, fear did not rule her.
She lifted her gaze, fire burning in eyes that had once only held exhaustion. "My place?" she echoed, her voice strong, clear enough to silence even the whispers. "My place is anywhere I choose to stand. You stole from me, forged my name, left me with nothing, and still I am here, stronger than you could ever imagine." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Joseph stepped forward then, pulling a folded envelope from his jacket pocket. His tone was calm, but every word cut like a blade. "We have proof, bank records, contracts, every lie you buried." He tossed the papers onto a nearby table, the crisp sound echoing in the hushed hall. A man in a black suit, a lawyer Joseph had quietly summoned, stepped into view, confirming the truth with measured authority. James's face drained of color, his glass slipping in his hand. This is nonsense," he stammered, but the conviction in his voice had crumbled. Mary took a single step closer, her daughter's small hand tightening around hers, steadying her. "The nonsense was believing I would stay silent forever. But silence is over. Tonight the truth speaks." The room seemed to shift, the balance of power breaking open like the first crack of thunder. Guests who once admired James now turned from him, their whispers cutting deep. And in that spotlight of judgment, James stood exposed, not as a man of charm and success, but as a fraud, unraveling before their eyes. Mary did not need applause nor pity. Her victory was quieter, deeper, reclaiming the voice he had stolen, the dignity he had tried to bury. And as Joseph stood beside her, steady as stone, she realized this reckoning was not just the end of James's deceit, it was the beginning of her freedom.
The ballroom confrontation had ended, but its echoes lingered in Mary's chest long after the chandeliers dimmed. For the first time in years, she walked away not in shame, but in victory. Yet freedom was not the same as security. Bills still waited, hunger still lingered, the future still stretched before her, uncertain and unsteady. A few days later, Joseph invited her to his office. It wasn't the sterile, glass-walled empire she expected from a man of influence. His office felt warm, grounded, sunlight spilling through tall windows onto shelves lined with books, framed photographs of family, and small plants that softened the edges of success. Mary stood at the doorway, hesitant, her daughter's hand clasped in hers. "I don't know why I'm here," she admitted quietly. "I've never belonged in places like this." Joseph rose from behind his desk, his smile calm, reassuring. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," he said gently. He gestured toward a chair, but Mary hesitated before finally sitting, her back straight, her palms tight in her lap. From a folder, Joseph pulled out neatly bound papers and slid them across the desk. "This isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's a proposal. I want you to work with me, manage a project, run something real. You have experience, talent, and more grit than most people I've ever met. What you did at that gala, Mary, that was leadership." Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering. "Work with you?" she repeated, her voice breaking on the edges of doubt. "I don't even know if I can—" "You can," Joseph interrupted, softly but with conviction. "And you will. Because you're not the woman James tried to define. You're stronger, smarter, and I think the world needs to see that." Mary's breath caught. She glanced at her daughter, who sat on a small chair near the window, humming quietly to herself as the sunlight danced across her hair. The little girl looked at her mother with pride, as though she had always known this moment would come. Tears stung Mary's eyes, but this time they weren't born of despair. They were born of possibility. She placed her hand over the papers, fingers trembling, not just at the thought of work, but at the gift of trust, of being seen as capable again. Joseph leaned back, his voice steady. This is a second chance. Not given. Earned. All I'm doing is opening the door. The rest is yours. For the first time in years, Mary allowed herself to imagine a future not built on survival, but on growth. And as she lifted her gaze, meeting Joseph's steady eyes, she realized that second chances weren't miracles, they were choices. And today, she was ready to choose.
The days that followed unfolded like pages of a new book, clean, unmarked, waiting to be written. Mary found herself in Joseph's office more often, not as a guest, but as a partner. She read reports, shared ideas, and slowly began to believe in her own voice again. Each decision, each step forward, chipped away at the walls of doubt she had carried for so long. But it wasn't only work that changed her. It was the small things. Her daughter running through the halls with laughter instead of coughs. Joseph showing up with books and crayons. Evenings shared over tea instead of silence. It was healing, disguised as ordinary life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in strokes of rose and gold, Mary found herself walking beside Joseph along a quiet path that overlooked the city. The air was cool, carrying the soft scent of blooming flowers. Her daughter skipped ahead, chasing fireflies that flickered like tiny lanterns in the growing dusk. Mary's steps slowed. For a moment, she simply breathed it in. The peace, the steadiness, the absence of fear. She glanced at Joseph, his hands tucked in his pockets, his eyes softened by the same sunset that warmed her face. "You changed everything," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the evening breeze. Joseph shook his head, a faint smile curving his lips. "No, Mary, you did. All I did was walk beside you." The words sank into her like a balm, simple yet profound. For so long she had felt like a shadow, invisible, forgotten. But here, under the fading light, she was seen, not as someone broken, but as someone whole. Her daughter ran back then, slipping her small hand into Mary's and Joseph's, linking them together without a word. And so they walked, the three of them, beneath a sky that slowly surrendered to stars. No grand declarations, no fireworks, just the quiet certainty that new beginnings don't always roar. They often arrive gently, like dusk settling into night, wrapping everything in the promise of tomorrow. We invite you to join Lightstories if this story strikes a chord with you, makes you smile, or stirs up strong emotions in you. Each story is meant to uplift, heal, and remind you of the beauty that comes from human connection. Share this story with someone who believes in kindness and second chances by clicking the subscribe button and turning on the notification bell. Keep your heart open till we cross paths again, because you never know when someone might ask, "Can I join you here?"